Hey everybody, and welcome to today's video where we're going to take a look at a plugin called Smooth Boolean. So, what does this plugin do? Well, as its name implies, it deals with one simple action, and that is smoothing out Boolean operations. Now, if you've ever done Boolean modeling, you know it can be quite messy, and adding in any sort of chamfering on the edges can be more or less an extremely frustrating thing to do. So, how does this thing work, and what do people actually think about it? Now, from what I've read, it's a more or less a hit and miss scenario because a lot of people don't really understand how this plugin works, so that they dismiss it. So today I'm going to try to give you an view on how this thing works and hopefully help you clear up some of the confusion that's around this plugin. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to start off by just creating two boxes. I'm just going to go ahead and create one box like this. Let's give it a 50 by 50 by 50. There we go. I'm going to center it 0, 0. And there we go. Now, as we all know, for Boolean operations, we need to have two different objects. So I'm going to hold down Shift and copy this thing over here. And I'm going to lift it up like this. There we go. So now we have some intersection between these two. So before I do anything else, I'm actually going to copy this thing over to this side. And I have another version over there. There. So I'm going to open up Compound Objects and from here choose Pro Boolean. Now I can choose what sort of operation I want to do. I can either go for subtraction or a union. In this case I want to go with a union because I want to add this box to this geometry. So I'm going to click on Start Picking and click here. Right away I can see now that this is just one geometry. So if everything goes right, I should be able to do a Boolean or a smooth Boolean operation on this. Or should I? So let's check it out. How do we see this thing? Well, if we install the plugin, when you right click and you go over to convert to, you can go ahead and convert this thing to a smooth Boolean. But in order for this thing to appear, you need to have a actual active Pro Boolean as we have over here. So right click, convert to a smooth Boolean. It will give us a few messages over here while it's converting it. And then here we go. We just got an unexpected error because it couldn't get the reference mesh for patch 1. The reason may be multi-element operands with intersecting elements, or in layman's terms, this is not how this thing is supposed to work. So why did we get this issue? Well, it's easy. First things first is that this is not how this thing is basically made to work. So in order to get this thing to work properly, what we need to have as a starting point is to have a more denser mesh. So in order to get that, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to increase the number of segments over here. So instead of having just one, let's hit it up with 15 like this on all sides. And I'm going to copy it over here and just align it center to this one. There we go. So now I'm going to select the original or the underlying one. We don't need that one. And there we go. We have these. I'm going to delete this and hold Shift and copy it over here. So now we have this scenario. So let's try and go ahead and Boolean these two. I'm going to click on Start Picking with any of these two selected. So Start Picking. Make sure it's set up as Union and click on the second one. Now, one thing you're going to notice as soon as I press on this Start Picking, all the geometry from both of these is going to disappear like this. Now, this is what we don't want to have. In order to fix this, we have to go into the Advanced Options and down at the bottom where you have Planar Edge Removal, just go from Remove All down to No Edge Removal. This will keep the original geometry intact like this. All right. So if we go ahead and convert this thing to a smooth Boolean, like this. Again, it will take a few seconds. It will do the operations, and this time around it will actually give us a different option here. Now in the options, now we can see that this thing has been converted to a smooth Boolean. We have borders here and we have some options. So let's see what is happening here. But before I do that, I'm going to backtrack one step behind. I'm going to deselect this thing and press F4. Now, if I take a look at this thing, what is really noticeable is that near the edges, what I'm dealing with here is some mismatches on the normals, because on the edges we have these black lines. So if I go in here now, and for example, if all of these are selected, I have to go into the selection mode, I can individually select any of these lines. As you can see, all of these are the edge lines. If I click on all of them are going to be selected, and if I click preview, now you're going to see these two red lines appearing next to every edge that we have here that is intersecting, or it's on two separate sides. Now if I go over here and move the offset, you'll notice those two are basically moving away from that corner edge. Now this will control how big that fillet is. So underneath here we have another which says fillet segment multiplier. So if I click on show segments, you're going to see these are green lines. Now these green lines will control how thick or how dense the geometry is going to be that is going to be created. So with offset we create how big the actual offset is going to be, and the fillet is how dense the geometry is going to be. So I'm not going to touch any of these options down here, because if we increase this chamfer level, it is going to increase the steps on which this thing is going to be projected. So at chamfer level 2 we get 5 number of segments. If you increase this thing, you go 7 and on and on. I'm going to leave it at 2, and I'm just going to click on solve mesh. Again, it will take a few seconds. As soon as this thing is finished, it will give me some nice rounded edges. Now if I take a look at here, I can notice that the edges indeed are smooth and everything looks right. But the problem here now is that issue that we had previously, or the underlying issue with the normals. As we can see, we still have that black near the edges. So how do we fix that? Well, actually it's not that hard. So in order to understand how that works, you need to understand how the plugin does all the calculations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this, put this thing back in the middle, make a copy. And now what I'm going to do here is add a turbo smooth, and that will give me a rounder look on the edges. I can even increase the iterations to 2, but I think even 1 is going to be enough. And again, I'm going to hit turbo smooth on the second one here. I'm going to go ahead and now with these two, hit it with pro boolean, make it a union. Again, in the advanced option, make sure no edge removal is applied, like this. And let's convert this thing into a smooth boolean. There we go. Again, it's going to take a few seconds. And as soon as this thing is finished, it will give us a smooth Boolean operand. But now, as we can see, we no longer have those black edges near the corner. But here is a problem now. If you take a look at over here in the borders, we now only have one border that we can control, while the rest of it is now with the same exact width or the same exact chamfer size that it had with the turbo smooth. So if I go in again, preview all, and increase the offset, as you can see, I can only control this. If I increase the segments, we get more denser geometry. Hit solve, I can get this thing to weld together. And it's actually looking really, really well. Like, it's a really clean geometry, really clean weld. So this is one of the ways that this thing can work. But what happens if we want to basically get this sort of a result, like it's going to be very smooth on the welding, but at the same time we want to be able to control each of these edges individually? Well, in order to do that, there is a workaround this thing. And I have to admit, it's a bit weird. It takes just a bit of trial and error before you understand how it works, but you'll see, it's not really complicated. So what it does, it's actually taking every element that you select as one unified normal. So in order to get around this, what we would have to do is we're going to have to nest one pro boolean inside another. So what this means in layman terms is we go over in one of these boxes like this, and what I'm going to do is create a plane with an auto grid on, click on one of the edges, and just make one selection over here, make one over here, one in like this, basically all the sides. We can even use the top ones and the bottom one. Generally, we can use the already existing geometry, but I've had some weirdness happening with that, so I just prefer to do it like this. Now, I'm going to turn off my snap and get everything in position. And when I mean position is I just want to have this thing cover the whole side of the box. Oops. There we go, like so. And you're only going to have to do this thing once. So that's why I'm trying to get everything to be the right size. I go like this. All right, awesome. So once we have this, what I'm going to do is select all of these planes that we just created that are touching the underlying geometry. Oops, this one is missing. There we go. So now, actually, let's do it like this. So that one and this one, and put a shell on it, a very small amount. Let's try it with 0.5, outer and inwards. There we go. Control I to select my box in here. And now take this box and convert it into a pro boolean with the subtraction operand or the subtraction operation. Start picking all of these elements. What you're going to notice is that as soon as we turn off the no edge removal, that will imprint that geometry over to our box. There we go. So all of these now, all of these sides have their own smoothing group. Just so I don't have to do this multiple times, what I'm going to do is deselect this and just copy this thing to the side once with this geometry. I'm not going to touch it anymore. So now I'm going to make one more copy in here. And again, with the same thing we did previously, I just wanted to be center to center over here. There we go. Select the overlaying one. And there we go. So now we have two of these boxes with the geometry that we imprinted on them with the pro boolean. So if I go over here, you're going to see with the new pro boolean, I'm going to hit on union and click on this box over here. Again, no edge removal. And now I'm going to go in, convert this thing to a smooth boolean, and in a few seconds, as soon as the operation is finished, we're going to get the result that we are going for. Well, hopefully. So let's see. Let's give it a few more seconds. It's doing the calculations. And as soon as it's finished, we should get this. There we go. So F4, we're going to see that we have no issues whatsoever. No shading artifacts on each or on any side. And now if I go click on all, we're going to see that we can control all of these edges individually. If I hit preview, I can see the thickness of this. There we go. You can control how thick it's going to be. And now here is the great thing about this. Now when I click on all, it selects all of these strips. And by just clicking the offset, you can see that all of these strips right next to them, they have this off and what is the actual value to it. But if I go in and click on selection mode, now what this is going to allow me is go over here and individually select all of these edges. So let's say that I want to have the edges on the top with a different offset from the rest of them. So just scroll over them, hold down Control and add to the selection. And now I increase this offset. You're going to notice that in the list, now these have a different offset from the rest of them. The rest are still set at 155, while these are at 19. So if I go ahead and increase this even further, you're going to notice this thing is happening like this. If I go show segments, it's going to give me the segments for this thing. And again, if I go all, now you're going to notice that the top here has this bigger distance between the offset. So now if I hit on solve mesh, the resulting mesh is going to be a bit different, like this. As you can see, much smoother on top, while the rest of it is still holding on to the sharper edges, and at the same time we have no issues with the darker edges or any of the normal map shading issues that we had previously. So let's go ahead and see one more version of this. For it, I'm going to start off with a sphere, but in order to get a more denser sphere, I'm going to use a geosphere. The reason for using the denser sphere is, like I said, this plugin is basically aimed for a geometry that's a bit more denser. So with the geosphere, we have much more geometry, unlike the sphere, the regular sphere, which would have to go in and add in more segments. So I'm going to delete this. And now what I'm going to do here is from this side, I'm going to create one more cylinder. There we go, something like this. There we go. I think this should work just fine. Gap segments at 0, height segments. I can increase this thing or decrease, doesn't really matter. Now, again, if I want to do a very, very simple Boolean, I'm going to make me one copy of this thing. I'm going to actually put this thing to the side. We still want to keep this thing if we want to continue subtracting cubes, just so I don't have to do it again. I'm going to put this thing over to the side just so we can test it. Now, what I'm going to do is in here, again, like we said, we need to have more geometry. So I'm going to increase the cap segments, maybe something like this. Again, the same thing is happening on the inside. And what I'm going to do is go into my compound, hit Pro Boolean. Now, like we said, when you're using Pro Boolean and then using smoothing or Smooth Boolean, what is happening is the body or the model that you are subtracting, you want it to be in one smoothing group, or the smooth turbo or the Smooth Boolean will construe it as one smoothing group. So it will make it simpler for it to work. So what this means, if we go ahead and pick this thing as a subtraction as it is, so start picking and hit it like this, we're gonna get something like this. And even though this front side over here has more geometry, the whole thing has been basically calculated as just one smoothing group. So if I go ahead and convert this thing into a Smooth Boolean, we're going to get that same problem that we had previously with the shading. We're going to see that in the interior, there we go, we can really get a distinct edge. So again, if I go in here like this and increase this thing with the preview, and let's just hit it with this, solve mesh. There we go. We get this, but again, at the base here, we're getting this shading issue. Now, in order to work around that, we're just simply gonna put this thing over to this side. And again, we're gonna nest in another plane here. So just go plane with auto grid, snap it on top of it like this. There we go. Give it a shell, just so it has some thickness. And like I said, just nest in one pro boolean with the subtraction. Start picking. Make sure you have no edge removal, like this. And I'm actually going to put one more plane on this side and take this cylinder to the side and keep it for future reference, just so we don't have to do this thing multiple times. So again, shell, subtract, and there we go. Now, all of these sides have their own individual smoothing group. So there you go, put it over to this side, like that. I'm going to take this as my pro boolean, subtraction, start picking, click on it over here. Again, no edge removal. And convert this thing to a smooth boolean. Again, a few seconds later, it will convert it to a smooth boolean, but unlike this one, we should get a much clearer result. And as you can see, there are no shading issues whatsoever. If we go over, select everything, preview, we're not going to change anything because we're going to keep the same exact values that we had over here. Just hit on solve mesh. There we go. As you can see, the same exact geometry that we had previously, but since all of those edges had their own smoothing group, we get a much cleaner rim cut over here and a much cleaner cut in the interior of this ball. So even though it's the same geometry with the same operation, since we used this sort of a geometry, we get a much better result. So based on everything that we already saw, what we end up concluding is that this plugin works really well if you have a denser geometry, which is basically what this thing is made for. And if you have a lower geometry base, it's really not the best use for this thing. So let's just test it out really quickly one more time on some shape. So let's start off with, let's say, another geosphere, something like this. Radius is fine. Increase the segments. There we go. You got a denser one. And let's just take a few of these elements, maybe put this thing over here. So make it a copy. There we go, something maybe like this. All right. I'm gonna take one more version of this. Let's put it maybe here. Another smaller one in there. And I'm going to take another one so we can cut the top off. So I'm basically just free-forming this. I really don't know what I'm trying to get here, but let's just try and make something so it's a bit of a more interesting edge look here. Something like this. The form should be more interesting. All right, so let's test it out like this and see what happens. Compound object pro boolean. Again, start picking with the subtraction. I'm going to click on over here. So I want to remove this thing. All right, so the top is removed. Again, no edge removal. Should be on. And I want to union with this thing. There we go. Now, once we have that, I'm actually going to move this thing a bit to the front like this. I'm trying not to get it so it's just hitting up the cylinder here, but I guess it's really not in the right spot. So maybe something like this. All right, that's gonna work. Hit it with another subtraction. Oops, that's what we don't want to get. Something like this then. There we go. No leftovers. Cut it like that. And let's just subtract this thing from the inside. How far is it in? All right, it's far enough. We can even put it all the way back like this. Okay, start pick, subtraction. There we go. So we get something like this, which looks interesting. Again, we can continue adding in more, but the more we add, it's just going to be the same workflow. As long as we have geometry with nested Booleans with proper smoothing groups, we shouldn't have any problems. So let's go ahead, convert this thing to a smooth Boolean. If your geometry is too big, you can get a warning asking you if you would like to rescale your model. You can choose to rescale it, which in turn will leave you with a helper, which is going to tell you what the scale is. Or if you just click on no, it will basically continue with the operation with the already existing size. So if we check all the options over here now, select all, preview, we can control again the offset. And one important thing here you want to do is, for example, when you have something like this, make sure that all of these adjacent edges are not overlapping over each other. If that happens, you can end up with a problem. So make sure those don't overlap. Show segments, controls the density, and just hit the solve mesh. And this again should give us a clean result if everything is right. And we've done everything right. As you can see, no issues, everything is clean. And if we take the two models that we just made here with the right way of doing this, if I go over and just give them a material that's reflective and turn on my IPR so I can see how these two look like. There we go. Even though we don't have any supporting geometry, like over here, except this edge, you're gonna notice that when you're rendering, even on geometry or even on shaders that are very, very reflective, you're gonna get a really good end result. So for rapid prototyping or kit bashing of different elements, this thing can be a lifesaver, and you can get some amazing results without actually having to worry about edge flows or any type of geometry that you're trying to follow along. As you can see, no problems whatsoever. And with this, we're finished with this plugin. Now, I actually had a chance to speak with the creator of the plugin, and he told me that he is working on the second version of the plugin, which is supposed to make things a lot simpler, and it will allow us to mix up high poly and low poly elements. So as soon as that thing is finished, I'm pretty sure I'm going to make another tutorial about how that thing works, and I'll do my best and see if we can cover this thing in more depth with actually making some real world elements or real world models with it, so we can get some traction on how this thing works. So up until then, I hope you guys had fun and you also managed to learn something new here. If you enjoyed the video, then click the like button, and also if you're not a subscriber, now is a great time to be one. So if you would like to support me and the channel, the support links will be below in the description of the video. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video. Peace.